happy almost Thanksgiving to the homeschool moms in the United States. For tomorrow, I might be watching football with you later in the afternoon, or my husband. I was asked a question by one homeschool mom. She said she's fairly new at this homeschool thing. However, her son, when she's actually trying to get her son to do the work, he doesn't want to do the work. It feels like pulling teeth to get him to do the work. And she feels like she's mostly doing it for him. So she would love a little enlightenment or encouragement, support, and advice. She says just trying to be consistent with the work is hard to do because of his rebellion. It makes her want to put it off until the last minute, and that doesn't benefit him either. Okay, so thank you for sharing that question. I always feel like I can get a better read on what might be happening if I'm in an actual conversation. If you and I, or if you'd like to book a conversation with me, you're welcome to do that. You can find the booking link below, and if you don't see it, you can ask it from me. We can have a conversation, because I've learned that usually the reasons that people come to me are not usually the reasons that we continue having conversations, that the thing we think is the first challenge really isn't the ultimate challenge. But having said that, part of my goal is to connect with your questions and for you to see that there are certain things you might want to consider. Like, very interesting, last week, how did someone else refer to it? It wasn't pulling teeth, maybe it was pulling hair pulling experience, lots of pulling, push, pull, all that stuff. And it doesn't feel good. Obviously it wouldn't feel good in real, a tangible pushing or pulling experience. But even in the homeschool realm, as the homeschool mom, it's not pleasant. It's tiring when there is constant push-pull kind of dynamic in a relationship with our child. So interesting, you're asking, you want to get your son to actually do the work. Probably my first thought would be, tell me about your son. Why do you think he doesn't want to do the work? There could be many answers to that question. Sometimes they don't want to do the work because of the actual work bores them, or they feel like I can do a little bit, but I don't want to do it for that long. I have other things I want to do. Perhaps there's a relationship dynamic that feels, doesn't feel good to him. He feels often pushed or pulled or forced to do many things, and he doesn't feel comfortable in that dynamic. Maybe, I'm curious, what would you say the reasons that he feels like he's being pulled to do it are? Getting your son to actually do the work. So when you say that, so the thing is, for the record, I started that way in the first few years. That was my approach, was very much, this is what we have to do. Let's go do it. This is important. We have to do the thing. And actually, I didn't actually have to do the thing, especially given the way that I specifically signed up to homeschool in my province. No one was overseeing what I was doing. So whatever expectations I had of how we would do things was really coming from me. And you don't need to have a formal provincial, state, or country's approach to homeschooling with great expectations and learning outcomes that are expected. You don't have to have a teacher overseeing you and having a list of things that you must do before the end of the year to feel compelled to do things in a certain way. You can be that person all on your own, telling yourself that you need to do those things, because why? What would be the reason? Especially, we are homeschooling our kids, so we have the opportunity to do things on our own terms for our child's benefit. And yet somehow there's something inside of us that says that we have to do it a certain way. I think there's many possible reasons why we think things have to happen a certain way. It isn't just because most of us went to a conventional schooled experience and the entire culture is mostly doing it. That's a really good reason, but that's not the only reason. There's various reasons that we might be thinking that we have to do it a certain way. But I would definitely consider looking at those perspectives on what an education is, why I have to do it the way that I'm doing it, why we have to actually do the work. How much work do we have to do? How do you know when you've done enough? Like, what's the point of the work in the first place? What does it serve? What's its purpose? What do we believe in education to be? And by the way, the Latin root of education is educato, if you haven't heard me say that before. And the Latin root of educato means to raise up. And so I ask you, what is your intention? What are you raising up? Probably you're going to tell me that you're raising up your son. And that is what I see as well. You're raising up your son. So if you're raising up your son, what are you raising him up for? How I see children and every human on the planet is that we are all unique. And if we are all unique, then we may have different reasons to be educated differently and to be raised up differently. So consider that as you are wanting him to do the work. Even if you're realistic in how much work and the kind of work and the reasons you want to do the work, I would ask myself two things. One, is it serving the relationship that I have with my child? Because it will always matter more than the actual thing you're teaching. And the second thing is what you're doing with your son, whatever it is you put in front of him and say, this needs to actually get done. When do you know you've done enough? Does it feel like enough? Have you randomly determined how much enough is? Has someone outside of you, say a school system or a homeschool, facilitator or whatever they're called in your area, did they decide? How did they decide that something is enough? So I think those are useful questions to ask so that we can both be realistic with our expectations so that we feel like we actually get it satisfied, and also that we're not being unrealistic with our child. But also looking at the bigger picture of like, how do we view education? What's the value of an education? In my experience, those moments that I pushed or I pulled or I insisted or I said, this is the way, the one right way that we do this because we are homeschoolers, we're classical homeschoolers, or now we're unschoolers, or now we're Charlotte Mason homeschoolers, or the various paths that I've took may not look the same as yours, but I do know that being prescriptive about how we do things and saying that there really is just one right way to do this will always be a formula for dissatisfaction, somehow, some way. I'm just going to call it, I'm going to just say it right there. It will be a way for you to be unhappy with something. When we try to force and push and pull something into being, we will possibly push, pull, force something in some way into being, but it mostly won't happen completely. It will definitely happen unhappily, and we might be possibly pushing someone away. And just food for thought, when you were speaking about being consistent with the work, I'm guessing you don't enjoy doing this, sitting down with him and hanging out until he's finished the work, because it's not fun. Pushing, pulling, forcing, insisting. It's not fun when it's not fun. And so I'm guessing you're also not enjoying it. And that's probably why you're not consistent with it, because nobody wants to be consistently tortured by something and signing up to do the thing that's unpleasant. So that, for me, is why I'm moving towards doing things that feel ease-filled or fun, really, moving in that direction of what child led learning might look like for your specific child, like leaning in to allowing your child to have more influence on what is going on in his education is really, really useful for you. And it will feel like you're breathing easier too. And you might discover that, and of course there might be more dynamics than you're speaking here, of course, but when you're speaking of his rebellion, because of his rebellion, it makes me put it off until the last minute. Yeah, because we could see his behavior as rebellion, and or we could see it as something's really not working for him, or it's unpleasant, or it's uncomfortable, or so many possibilities. But it might not actually be rebellion. Just humor me here in a minute, or for a minute. Just consider this, even if you're like, yeah, Teresa, it's rebellion. If it weren't rebellion, what might it be? What if there is something else going on and it's not rebellion? And if you were to look at him through the eyes or the perspective of something else, like he's easily distractible, or perhaps he has a learning disability, or he's neurodiverse, or he's distracted by conflict that's happening in the home, or he just doesn't like math, or, he just, which was me. But it's so many possibilities. If you were to look through those lenses and see him through that perspective, and you didn't see it through the rebellion perspective, how would you engage him then? Because how we see things and how we decide to approach the other person very much sits upon or is determined by how we perceive them or how we see them. And so we have to be aware that how we are viewing them is influencing how we are engaging them, and therefore how they are engaging us, and how we respond, and how they respond, and how we respond, and how they respond. And then it can start getting real messy and frustrating. And then it feels like, this kid. I know that feeling too, by the way. So clearly I know that feeling as well. And I've been there where I have seen it in one perspective that really was not useful for me, because I looked at her in a certain way and I said, this is the way she's engaging, and she's doing it for these reasons. And when I looked at her that way, she engaged me in that way. And then I saw this and she reacted like this, and I saw this and she reacted like that, and it wasn't useful. So what would happen if you saw him through a different lens? And what might that other lens be? Then what might be the natural outcome to seeing him differently? If any of these things resonate with you, or if you want to explore them further, you're welcome to book a conversation with me. I hope that helps.